I mean,
for her, no matter what. But
I mean, she is.
yeah,
but it's not public yet.
I got you. Just like Susan. No, back when Jerry Williamson was the editor, he had us collaborate on a book review, like 4
read my book. I did not want to be called on. I didn't want anybody to look at me. I didn't want to speak. I would go talk to my professor in their office, but in class, absolutely not. Terrified.
I never shut up in class.
Yeah. Oh, I know, because I.
No, I mean, I get it. Isn't that what I was
Alright.
and you have to figure out how to do it, and everybody's talking about it. There was something
Not
else
still,
you asked me about,
if
and I
I
was like, oh,
have to
so
speak,
that creates correct.
like, especially something formal, I
You
get.
did this, and
You
you
get
need to do
jittery.
this. So that creates interesting.
I don't. I'm trying to figure out how to figure out.
Oh, yeah, because I agree.
Sometimes. Now, it's, the poetry readings are different. Those I don't mind doing. I don't get too nervous. That's kind of, this feels like a play.
Needed it.
I think so.
Yeah, I have too many original.
Membership of the party.
Next to me. She said the best. She used to be a wedding.
Yeah, I'll wait another minute. And then these people still getting.
Man, I wonder what I'm gonna cover.
You're saying the best.
Always thinking Jordan Howard when you drove past me this morning. Someone looking up all the you didn't say anything. There was no news outside.
Like, like 6 years after I was
Did the same thing in the South Side of California. Oh, okay. That's what he was saying. Rude.
I wonder I like you.
They're strict.
We got boring Justin.
Yeah, I suppose. Your mom even know what you do. Yeah, I just, it is still interesting. I was worried because I had to do a paper for content. Just like the, support that light. I don't even know if there's one on the street. Should have brought in my blanket. It's kind of cold.
Yeah, it's getting long. Because you can't.
Oh,
I mean, it's up to you.
I always thought it was
Oh, yeah, is there going to be a? Yes, so the link that I sent you will be one that they can use for clear.
Okay, yeah, I'll let them know.
Yeah, once the string ends, it'll be permanently archived.
Yeah, sometimes you can talk to Clinton about. It's so cool. There's gotta be a way to.
I mean, we can make even shorts out of them.
Yeah, something.
There's a lot we can do with this.
Yeah, all right now.
What happened to get off work? She said that she has birthday.
I think,
I'll be back for the reading too, but.
you get your sheet music.
A month ago, and pick up like the financial thing.
Yeah, we'll try it in just a second.
Every month, because that's an address. And they didn't calculate it. That's usually accurate. Maybe that's song and dance. And then I said, I want to copy that.
We don't have.
I said, I keep my records.
Setting everything up.
So right now, I'm just kind of like learning more about. And that's what we do. Like, trying to understand. But
There's no reason for me to bring
I noticed.
there's always a reason.
You can cheat on your throat. Still hurt. Not all.
Added to that event.
That's something to do with my pulse rate.
Oh, yeah.
Anytime you're ready, John.
Yeah.
We have our.
Hello, everyone, and welcome everyone here in the Robert F. Kidd Library to our first event of the semester in the ongoing Little Kanawha Reading Series. And welcome to all of you out there watching this via our YouTube feed. As you probably know, the Little Kanawha Reading Series is a collaboration between the Department of Language and Literature, the Department of Social Science and Appalachian Studies, and the Robert F. Kidd Library. Its mission is to provide a showcase for a diversity of literary forms and voices in order to acknowledge and enrich the cultural heritage of Appalachia and the communities around the Little Kanawha River. We have a wonderful reader for this evening, Matthew Wimberley, who's traveled here all the way from the southern Blue Ridge portion of these Appalachian mountains. But I'm going to hand things over now to our own Bob Hutton, who's going to give Matthew his proper introduction. So let's welcome Bob.
Thanks, John. Did you say the diversity or the adversity?
Both.
Okay. Thanks to everyone who came out tonight. This is a really great crowd, and this is one of Little Kanawha is one of my favorite things that we do here on campus. By the way, is anyone visiting from off campus? Show of hands. Looks like we got an all-campus crowd tonight, but and that's wonderful because it shows the level of attention and respect that we have for the fine arts and literature on this campus. And I'm particularly excited tonight because a friend of mine is presenting. Matthew is someone I've gotten to know in the last 2-3 years, probably going to the Appalachian Studies Association conference, which brings together people from a lot of different disciplines. I'm a historian, he's a poet, there's banjo-playing sociologists who also show up. I mean, it's pretty much, we cover the waterfront pretty much. But in any case, Matthew Wimberley teaches creative writing at Appalachian State University, my alma mater, and he's the former assistant professor of English at Lees-Mcrae College in Banner Elk, North Carolina. Of course, both of those schools are near where he grew up in the Blue Ridge Mountains in Avery County.
Right on the line.
Okay.
I went to school in Avery County, but I live in Watauga.
Oh, right.
I know, right?
He grew up on the county line like many people in the mountains, which sometimes comes in handy. He's the author of 2 collections of poetry. First, All the Great Territories, which was published by SIU in 2020. Is that Southern Indiana?
Southern Illinois.
I'm sorry, Carbondale, Southern Illinois. And it was the winner of the 2018 Crab Orchard Poetry Series First Book Award, and also the winner of the 2020 Weatherford Award, which is given by the Appalachian Studies Association. And also, more recently, but I think basically in the same year, but I think in the second half of the year, Daniel Boone's Window, a volume that came out through LSU Press. Of course, that's Louisiana State, in 2020, and it was selected by Dave Smith for the Southern Messenger Poets Series. He also has a chapbook called Snake Mountain Almanac, which was selected by Eduardo C. Carras, and it was also the winner of the Rain Arroyo Chapbook Contest from Seven Kitchens Press. Aside from that, he was also previously the winner of the 2015 William Matthews Prize given by the Asheville Poetry Review. If you know anything about Western North Carolina, you know that Asheville is the last vestige of the avant-garde um, The Last Refuge, perhaps. And his work was selected by Mary Seibest.
You got it.
All right. For the 2016 Best New Poets Anthology, and his writing has appeared more recently in the Poem a Day series from the Academy of American Poets, Blackbird, and the Three Penny Review. Matthew got his MFA from NYU, where he worked with children at St. Mary's Hospital as a StarWorks Fellow. And I'm going to assume that was sort of your professional introduction to poetry. Please help me welcome Matthew Wimberley. Thank you. Thank you, Matthew.
That was great. Let me get settled up here. How's everybody doing? Yeah, good. Thanks for coming out on a Thursday. Thursday, right? I've been on the road, so good. One thing down. So I'm really happy when Bob asked if I would want to come and read. It's always an honor to get to spend an afternoon talking about poems with folks. There's a lot worse things we could be doing. And I love coming to West Virginia. It's beautiful. It feels different as soon as I'm here from Western North Carolina, where I grew up, but it's different enough to be strange, but familiar enough to feel like home. So I really love it here. Thanks for having me. I'm going to read from my two books and then maybe some new poems for you all, but we'll see where we go. My first book, All the Great Territories, came out 2 weeks before the COVID pandemic sort of swept across the country and the world. And so reading from both of these books feels a little new to me still, which has been nice to go back to these poems. That they aren't that old, although some of the poems, particularly in here, are now more than a decade old. So it took a little while. I write about place, a lot about Appalachia, or at least the 30 miles of Appalachia that I know really well. I think that's sort of important for us to consider when we're writing about places. No one person speaks for a place, particularly a region as diverse and big as Appalachia. And I think that, if anything, poems are a way for us to see the world different than the way we experience them, right? Raul Zarita says that if a poem does anything, it gives compassion, which I think about a lot. Zarita, Chilean poet. And this first book is a book of myths. I think my father died right before I went to grad school, and he and I had a somewhat strained relationship. We weren't around each other for most of my life. And I think maybe some of you have experienced this when you're young, if your parents are parents and then you get older and they become people. And my experience was somewhat the opposite. My father was this person who I knew loved me and who I cared about, but we had an estranged relationship, and it was right towards the end of his life that I got to know him more as a parent and tried to reconcile some things. But the poems allowed me to keep speaking to him after he died. This first poem is called At Night. Awake, alone, away 100 miles west of Laramie, shadows bend snow fences towards the end of America, past wheatgrass braided like rope 2 feet high and fallen in one long tide as the wind sweeps clear the trees. Suppose I can say anything to him now, infinite, unchained from life. In the liminal dash glow, he's out there just beyond, ready to disappear. My favorite picture of him is a mugshot. There was a night when my parents were in love before I was conceived, and the slow drift between them wasn't noticeable. He'd knocked a man out, broken his nose. In the picture, he's young, wearing a rugby shirt, back against cinder blocks. He's laughing, the way a grin cuts at his cheeks, and his shadow permanent on the wall, dark enough to fall asleep in. It really is my favorite photo of him. And before I went to grad school, I was working these seasonal jobs. I had finished my undergrad. I'd moved home to the mountains in North Carolina. And my friends and I, what are we doing? We're working, 60 hours a week, one gig. Up in Western North Carolina, things sort of revolve around Christmas tree farms and the Christmas tree season, as well as the ski industry. So by the time March comes around, those things have slowed down or stopped, and then you start landscaping or delivering furniture or something like that, sometime late April, mid-May. And my friends and I decided that we would just hit the road. We would work extra jobs, and we would spend a month and a half, spend all of our money, and just drive out in my Toyota 4Runner and see where we could go with no plan, which is what we did. A few weeks before we left was when my father died. And so maybe somewhat morbidly, I carried his ashes with me, we crossed into Canada at one point, and I was thinking, is this, they have a list of things that you can't, and I don't think that you're supposed to take a person's remains across the border, but we did, and we didn't get caught. So we almost got caught for having bananas, though, which is a problem if you're going out of the country. So I think I write a lot about this idea of people and place, and when I was traveling, I was thinking about how home could be flattened, how it could be turned into representation, which is a problem for a poet because the very act of writing is that negotiation with how do I draw from the real, how do I create what's real. And I think of Adrienne Rich, who said, what kind of beast would turn themselves into words, right? And that's always conscious on my mind. I'm thinking about when I'm writing about people and place, this is a real place, these are real people, they're not just props. We've seen the harm that can do, particularly here. This poem is called Incineration. Because it's my memory, I can give it to you. The stars and the pine trees, their charred trunks with blackened limbs and pockets of sap, the scent of cold earth, and my father still breathing, smoke covering his lips, and the worn motel, someone with a deck of cards, even a deer and a palomino who don't move when you shine a light toward them, unable to notice how their open eyes become dahlias, and then another imitation of darkness. There on a folding table is a stale piece of Wonder Bread, resting on a Dixie plate. Only it looks more like a man curled into himself, as if he wanted to crawl back into the womb. But it is only bread. If I'd taken a bite, it would taste like open air. While at the gas station, a van drives up to the cash-operated pumps, and the language of migrants is quiet laughter and wind. You can hear how it's working over the guzzle of a gas tank, how it means the lifting of wrists and $3 an hour. But when one of them looks over at me, what he cannot see is how his face does not belong to him, as smoke rolls across it, but becomes my father's, vanished from this world. I thought if I didn't move, maybe it would last. Maybe outside stars would come out, and the spiders would build one final web I could stay inside. He looked unreal, made up into a poor imitation, hair cut short and face shaved into the style of eternity. Because of the symmetry of his body, I reached down and stroked the lapel, kissed his forehead. And I don't know why I did this, opened his eyes, and they remained in one long gaze of this world as I walked away, which meant forever, tasting the bitter powder of makeup hours after I'd left the room and his body slid into a furnace to be destroyed and become oblivion. Now I see his eyes open as the short crescendo of flame breaks over his body. All he had at the end, moving through him. Can y'all hear okay back there? Am I loud enough? That's always the issue, right? It would defeat the purpose. So I say all that about my dad and being on the road because the poems in this started to come together. I didn't know that I was going to write about my father. I left for New York the fall after this sort of peregrination, and I didn't know what to write about. I was writing the kind of poems that were about place, but they didn't have an anchor, and being able to talk to my father gave me more, they felt real suddenly. They felt like there was a stake. Poems have to risk something, I think. So there was a stake to that, and also because he wasn't there, I had to take care of the way I spoke about him or to him. He wasn't there to speak up for himself. Elegy is like that. Elegy is a very delicate thing, I think, and maybe it's impossible. But I think about when I write for the dead, the question of, I guess, decency, and is it more indecent not to say something, right? This is another elegy, and it's for a friend of mine. It's called Elegy Written in Dust, Kicked Up Along a Back Road. After Larry Levis. Maybe grass, gentle against the ankle bones of cows going up and over the pasture, become no different than people who turn to light at the end. One Christmas, a man only a little younger than I am took off his clothes and left them piled on the living room floor like an atoll risen over blue tile. His mother found them the next morning and framed by a window saw him hanging in the backyard, an extension cord tied around his neck. And because she could not undo the knot and had to wait an hour for the police to make the drive through the remnants of a snowstorm, she went inside to do his laundry. Only when officers took down his body did she begin to cry. As I walk a fenceless cow pasture a few years later, grass has lost its green, and fall is coming from the west. Something about piles of leaves reminds me of the first girl I loved. Her hair the final color fall takes. After the veneer of rust has dimmed, treetops left devastated as I was one afternoon. The air sweetens in the decay of maple leaves. Brittle on the ground, they break apart like paint flecked off old pottery. Miles from here, a mother is crying, kneeling down beside a headstone. This time of year, when I'm home, I could say I never left. In this part of the country, time passes with each football season. Friday nights when fog raises a white flag from the end zone as people park a half mile from the stadium, their cars like crooked teeth. I'm reminded that once in high school, a quarterback led the team to the state championship. And for 3 years after, playing second string at a Division III college, returned home after flunking out to work his father's tree farm, and one day walked barefoot into the snow to climb a 7-rung ladder, slip an orange cord over his neck, and step out. This is all true, except I couldn't tell you anything about his mother, how light hushed over his grave. Can't say how long it took the police to plow snowdrifts large enough to swallow a man, or if his mother did his laundry, or what his bruises looked like, how many steps he had to climb. Even this field I couldn't show you on a map, but ask me about the grass, the wind through the meadow, and the drawl of branches after a passing storm, or stadium lights turned on humming through the fog, the single voice of an entire county rising through metal bench seats as a young man dives into the end zone. So, I've not been accused of writing happy poems. But we don't get to choose what we write about. So that's can be a difficult truth, I think, for young writers. Are any of you writers in here? Some poets, maybe? Raise your hand. Yeah. So Be brave. Be brave, yeah. Yeah. It's hard, you don't get to choose. You might want to be the great, political poet of your era or something, and you write about carburetors or something, and that's just what happens. Stanley Kunitz has this great poem called King of the River, and Kunitz writes, "I did not choose the way chose me." I think about that a lot. Let's see, how are we doing? How are we feeling? Are we feeling good? Yeah, okay. I'm going to read some poems from Daniel Boone's Window, which really, I think, I had to learn to write about place in all the great territories. I was in New York City when I wrote a lot of these poems, or at least drafted them. That last poem I wrote, I was home between semesters in the summer. I was working in a general store selling bird seed mostly. And I had these long nights where I was just at the counter and I would keep a notebook with me. And that poem just sort of slowly came over a few weeks, every night writing towards it. So, carry a notebook with you and a pen, something you can do. But I learned in New York, I couldn't touch home. I had to have this sort of psychic geography and look to poets who were writing about place, specific to Appalachia as well. I had to think really hard about my favorite path through the woods, or there's this stand of trees. My wife always makes fun of me because I love it so much. It's just these maples beside the road, and they look so broken and beaten down. But about this time of year, they start turning color and they catch the light a certain way. And I just would think about that. It would sustain me, right? Those memories. And so writing, bringing my father to the mountains where he moved to Virginia, to Richmond. And I think he visited me once or twice after my parents busted up in the mountains. And having to write to him in that landscape to bring him there helped me think more about home. And I think I'm a poet of writing about those 30 square miles. That's the thing that the way has given me. So now the second book continues that sort of conversation about myth and place. This is for my friend Michael Joslin, who, if any of you have been to App Studies ever, he is a figure and a very good friend. So this is called Poem Swept Clear of Time. Day cracks, almost peels off the walls of a chicken coop in Beuladine. Hot for October. This morning there in the wreckage made from fallen leaves and along the dry creek stones, I found a hummingbird propped up on one shoulder, her wing an imperfect triangle, a gnomon cut in the sun. Dependent on the light, the bird turns from blue-green to purple, the cuticle of a scorpion under stars, amylite, iridescent, the 900 feathers catching the eye, as once two strangers looked up across a crowded room through a smoke that exists only in old movies now, and so here I am. In front of me, the feathers on the throat rise against the body's stillness, the gambler lifting his cards off the table to peer at his final hand, all in this life, as it always comes down to. All around the rhododendrons thirst, the blue stem thirst. Daylight moves like the scalpel of an undertaker preparing the land. This morning the geese appear low in the flyway, heading farther south. Distance turns their calls faint, pro-selismatic. Tomorrow is already working its way loose from the apple trees, the wild fruit's skin thick, crepuscular. And if I recall how the flesh was cold in my hands, and if I could count each bruise the way you begin to count the stars before getting sidetracked by another story, and if I was up for company, carrying this bird out to a patch of head-high ironweed, I might say I feel ashamed. Not because there was anything I could have done differently, but because there was. Hours later, as I pull a few burrs out of my pant leg, I go back to the brightness made from morning, how the sunlight's final wish was the down leaves parting like flames as I moved over them, a little spiral of wind. That's a poem makes me think about Michael Joslin's farm, and always something out there. When I think about people being turned into a representation, particularly by folks outside of Appalachia, I think about one of my friends who is maybe the most brilliant person that I know. Neither of his parents finished high school. He grew up on a Forest Service road with his parents and his brother, and then he went off to study applied mathematics at LSU for a PhD program. He was always really brilliant. Is brilliant. So this is a poem to my friend. It's called Summer. Reborn the son of a cafeteria worker and a farmer, Vivaldi took a job down the Globe Road each summer, working the shrubbery fields with his father, counting the near endless rows of trees from the creekside and up over the mountain. He ate tabs of acid one day a month, relearned Italian, French, Spanish, grew his hair past his shoulders, and picked up the fiddle to play old time after he sold a gold drum banjo for weed and rent money. He didn't believe in reincarnation or an afterlife, but practiced prayer and studied Cesar Chavez and Lenin and Jesus Christ. Out in the fields, he laughed with the migrants and plotted against the bosses, even his father. Returning home each night with his lips cracked and skin burning and playing a few tunes on his back porch, no crowds appeared. In line at the grocery store buying Coors Light and bread, no one thought him a composer of anything, and his would-be benefactor scoffed at his white arms covered in tattoos and then went back to second or third homes after a long day of tennis and card games and fashionable cocktails. Later, he delivered them green giant arborvitae and rosy teacup dogwood to improve the land. Most days, he is too tired for misery. When the work is done and the bills open on the counter and the loss calculated against joy, he opens the case, and there's a sound that lifts like a body beside a gravestone and fills the holler, loud and fierce as thunder. Oh, we're doing good. I've got a 4-year-old at home. Just turned 4. Well, actually, now, wow, time evaporates. Not just turned 4. She turned 4, recent still, but back in June. So it seems like yesterday. When she was born, it was the summer of 2019. So she had her first birthday we just walked out in the woods and listened to some music. She was really into Paul Simon's Graceland. So she liked that, controversial album. But that's what she wanted to hear. So I would sit with her though for hours in this like strange terror and joy, this mixture of time there in early 2020, that summer, and just watch her. And I started writing a few poems to her, and I knew that they were part of what became Daniel Boone's Window, just a few. But this is a poem that I wrote sort of late in the process of the book, and it ended up being the first poem in the book. So it's to her. And I think before I read it, I should say, between All the Great Territories and the second book, there were these poems that sort of, because they happened so close to each other, that I thought some of the poems were supposed to be in the first book, and then they ended up in the second book, and they became kind of bridges, and I like that. I like the kind of, I don't know, it's not a fugue or something, but I like this kind of motif, I guess, that anchored poems for me. So this is called Encomium for Our Last Days. One day, when I don't work 2 or 3 jobs at once, enough money for us to get by on, tucked away sometime just before the end of the world, which waits now like beams chosen by the crossmaker, covered in sawdust on the ground. A side note, a hole in the parchment, guessed at and not yet the backdrop of the annihilations to come. Then we'll sit alone together on the couch watching reruns, or if we're feeling up to it, drive down the mountain to drink up the last red wine of our lives at a restaurant neither of us could get reservations at before. Emptied now, the regalia of dust and the cobwebs trembling just so, the leftover threads from the soft lacework on the wedding gowns of death. There, we sit in the dark together, laughing at the place settings, how the forks and knives and even the spoons that we've never used suddenly look hilarious. Surely it will fall apart. Surely our time is closing in. That's all going to be a little later. This morning, it is enough to hold our daughter by the 4 big windows and mimic the birds she has no names for. Black-capped chickadee, Carolina wren, junco, 2 of them picking sunflower shells from the frosted leaf fall. A titmouse the color of all the heavens. She knows what I mean. It is enough. She cries out from my arms for all she doesn't understand, and I look at the same face I've made trying to find a way to place a word into a conversation just for the sound of it on the air. Adumbration, Holothurian, windrow. Y'all ever do that? You hear a word and you're like, I just want to say this word. I'm going to figure out a way to say it, you know. I do that all the time. It's maybe a curse. We feeling good? Feeling good? Great. I'm just read a few more. I think maybe 3 poem warning. How's that? So, let's see. So I've been writing new poems. That's what you do. You write some, and then you got to write more. I think about the poet James Wright, his son Franz Wright, both of them Pulitzer Prize winners. But Franz wrote a poem, I think he was maybe 17, and he gave it to his dad, who by then was pretty accomplished poet, like very well-known poet. And unfortunately for Franz, it was a good poem. And his dad said, well, I guess you're a poet. Welcome to hell. So I've been writing these new poems, I think mostly all for my daughter. Let's see. Just got to pick the right order here. This is the problem with new poems. I don't know them well enough yet. Let's see. Okay, I do know. I was working all summer. A friend of mine has this little 10-acre farm right on the border between North Carolina and Tennessee. And I was going out there and helping him. And really, I'm just, clueless. And so I asked him, to put me to work. And that was not a mistake. It was a good call. And I'd be out there for hours, not many hours, not like some folks who actually have to work for a long time, and it's brutal and hard work. Go pick potatoes for 2 hours, and then imagine people doing that, 8 hours a day in the heat, over and over again. It gives you a real perspective. But I'd be out there, and he didn't expect too much of me, so I could sort of daydream as I pick these potatoes or kale or whatever it was. And so I would start writing poems in my head, or lines. I would think of something, and then at the end of the summer I had this poem called After the Potato Harvest. Today I brought up from the earth the cold potatoes, the living deposits, golden as the throats of deer in late summer. Here and there the separated roots spread like remembered lightning through the soil. Miles away, my daughter has asked Sally, who dies first, kids or grown-ups? Though it will be hours before I learn this. Come home with dirt in the groove of my ear, the scapha, there under the sunburned helix. Who knew anything this small could be made of language like this? The rain comes on from the south, gathering in little cells on the radar, purple as old bruises. I've failed to explain time, the concepts of yesterday and tomorrow and of patience. Her question lives on inside me, like the wren making her nest in the rough frame of an unfinished barn, like the milkweed which disappears and returns. It's scary reading new poems. I also started playing around a little bit with some more formal poems. Form is kind of a way to control chaos, I think. At least you've got a basic idea. Not that it's easy to do and not that you should do it, but on days when I'm lost, I say, well, I'd try writing a sonnet. I could do that. You can't do it. You can't do it. But you say you're going to try, and then you realize how horrible it is. But I was reading this Seamus Heaney poem, and Heaney has been so important to me in terms of place and people, writing about people. And he has this poem called Personal Helicon, and it's always stuck out in my mind. I go back to it, I recite it, I've got it memorized, which you should memorize poems. It's something that you can do for free. And I started to think about Helicon as a mountain in Greece where the muses are supposed to have originated from, right? And my daughter's name is Calliope, so the muse of epic poetry, maybe a little on the nose. It was COVID and thought it was beautiful. It was before COVID, actually. I have no excuse. It is a beautiful name. So actually, I came to that name. I always sort of liked it, and I was like, my wife's never going to go for this. And then one day, she was reading a book, and it had this character, Calliope, in it. She's like, I really like this name. And I said, that's interesting that you do. I didn't let on too much, because... and then when we didn't pick a name until she was born, and then we just knew. But anyway, Helicon is about 5,000 feet above sea level. So the mountain I live on is also right over 5,000 feet. So I thought, well, let me try, as my friend, the poet Joe Millar says, let me try a rhymer. Have some rhyme in here. So this is Personal Helicon. It's for Sally and after Seamus Heaney. Now 5,000 feet above sea level, we go out after dark rain to scavenge the mosses for new life, the small shovel of her hand scooping the damp earth, the hinge of a gate to the backyard like the old music of crows who watch at a distance. Fog rises into the pines, past the folds of the closest ridges. One dark sentence follows another, and I stay a ways back to watch our daughter, named for the muse of poetry and song, sink in the haze to check between clover for mushrooms. And I think of the word mycorrhizal and the two-way ladders below the surface, and find her saying, Mommy, it's beautiful, as she tears away ragweed, dead ragweed, her face now lit up in the strangeness of time, and stares half-smirk as if about to sing some invented verse, an ode with rough rhyme, to hear herself, to set the darkness echoing. And I should mention that last line's all Heaney, so that's pretty good. So, all right, one more. Y'all have been great. Thanks so much for spending the afternoon with me. The sunlight. I think we'll have time if folks want to ask some questions or eat the delicious cheeses that are provided back there. So, oh, not there. When I was in West Virginia, when was 2 years ago, Bob? When was that? When were we up in Morgantown? Was that 2 years ago almost? Year and a half?
We were way West Virginia.
We were in Morgantown for ASA 2022.
Spring 22.
Okay.
You're right.
So I was up there with Bob. We'd gone to a fine establishment called Jeans. And we were walking back from Jeans. I remember this. Or we'd left Jeans, and I'm looking out over, I think we were on this bridge and looking out, and the roads were slicked. And I just started writing a poem in my head, and then I had this 7-hour drive home. And so the poem just kept coming, and I sort of didn't want the poem to happen then because I was focused on driving, and I had to pull over and stop and write for like 45 minutes, and I got a draft of something that I thought I liked. And let me make sure it's here. Maybe it's not even here. I tell this story. You got to wait for the poem when the book comes out. All right, so this is the poem that started there, and then I think that was March. So it was March of 2022. And I think I had this draft done by, I want to say last September or before that maybe, last August. So it took a while. But this is called Materials for a Gravestone Rubbin'. I've long wanted to be starlight in spring, and the late snow that lingers there, coming down at Harper's Ferry over the river, or gathered on a windowsill on 3rd Street in Brooklyn when I was 22. The potpourri of sky the wind carries after a storm, the gray darkening on a far ridge. If you are reading this, there is still a way. I can take your smooth palm in mine and lead you toward a distant city and a night when you were on the mountain and dreaming of the other world. And we can walk together past the pre-war homes converted now to low-rent apartments for college students, or workers come in from long days on a road crew, coveralls draped over the backs of kitchen chairs, and the light swaying just so. We can go on, along the cracked sidewalks above the train tracks that can't exist again, even as the grasses come up between them, and look through a fog in a single pair of headlights, making definite beams in the material cold. No moonlight to get netted up in on the surface of the water. No traffic at this hour, just the scraps of paper blown into gutters and the electric hum of street lights. A few walk-down alleys overgrown with briars, creeping vines, their crude lattice work against the brick, and the exhale of a bartender on a smoke break, and the smoke which still drifts. Now it must be all worn through, but then it was barely remarkable, though I stopped to look back at the homes and its snow melt on roads, the flat glitter on the black road, the moire pattern yet to be captured by language. And for a minute believe in something as my stepfather believed in the smell of fire whenever he left in the middle of the night and returned before dawn and spoke to no one, didn't wake anyone up. Sometimes I feel that alone, that pure, as if looking back at myself through the scrim of time, and you were there standing in our kitchen at this hour, and I can almost hear you, the first singing caught up there in the back of your throat. Lately, I've stopped worrying about the end. Each day my hand is smaller on your shoulders. New birds still return, and the hillsides green all around. The stars have traveled over the horizon, and in the blink of an eye, you are here. Grapevine charcoal in your hand, little hyphen I have become. Thank you all so much. This is a great audience. Can y'all come with me every time I read? So just show up. So, yeah. I guess we have time if there's questions. I'm happy. I don't know what the protocol here is, but
We can certainly allow questions. Absolutely.
so if anyone, and I do have some books if anyone's interested. But yeah. Hey.
When did you publish your first book?
That was so. All the Great Territories. This one came out in 2020, February of 2020. And the oldest poem in here, maybe that's of interest, the oldest poem I wrote in 2009. So sort of stayed with me there. And then it won a contest, which is often how books of poetry are published. Not the only way, but often, especially first books. And it won a contest in 2018. So then it took until about a year and a half before it came out. And I have to say this because I didn't get to read too much from this book. I haven't. I've gotten to read plenty everywhere I go. But I worked with a fantastic poet and editor, John Tribble, who unfortunately he passed away just a few months before the book came out. And yeah, this book's really a credit to John and his eye and care. So really great poet. Yeah, thank you. Anyone else? I know it's the end of the day. Yeah, Bob.
I want to hear about the work you did with children when you were at NYU.
Yeah. You know, I still include that in my bio because I think it's some of the most important work that I've done. I worked at a hospital where there were children who were living at the hospital and going to school there under constant care, and all of them were nonverbal. And so we would go in and we'd make up games or word games. Some of them ranged from, maybe 5 years old through high school age. And I would go in for a few hours every week and write alongside them, write with them, have them, pick words out of a hat, and we would sort of construct something. And they would always come up with pretty amazing things. Some of them were more easily. They had an easier time communicating, so they could point or touch something. And some of the kids there weren't. But everyone. It was this amazing kind of alchemy that happened where this group they would write these amazing things. I remember one young woman wrote this poem. I brought in postcards, and we did this sort of ekphrastic, or poem about a piece of art. And she picked these words that sort of mirrored the postcards, and she had this great image of the mirror of sky. I mean, she came up with this. She pulled these words, the blue mirror of sky, which in the poem too, it was amazing, but that was a really lovely image. So I've always, my mom was a first grade teacher, and so I've always enjoyed going into classrooms with kids who everybody's a poet, right? Until you're probably in the third or fourth grade, and then other things start creeping in, or you're told not to do this or something. But young kids particularly they just love language so much. So that was a great experience. So work alongside those kids there. So a little long-winded response, but yeah.
You had mentioned that you had written a few of your poems while you were living in New York, and your work, just based on what you've read for us today, is very richly and uniquely Appalachian. Did you find it at all difficult to write about home so far away from home, or was it ingrained in you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it was extremely important to me, which made it more difficult because I wanted to get it right, because I couldn't just walk out my door and go touch a paper birch or listen to a titmouse or something like that, right? And there's other nature elements all around me in New York, but I really wanted to write about. I didn't want to write about home. It just became this thing where more and more it was a way for me to not feel alone in the world. New York City is a very lonely place, and so I'd write about home. I've heard Ron Rash say that he has to be in a place to touch it, to be able to write about it. And I think now that I'm home, I've learned how to do that now, and I think maybe that is really important, that I am here and I don't leave for extended periods of time or anything. And I'm saying here like this is my home, but you know, I feel at home here. So yeah, it was hard. It was necessary to write about home, and also one of those things. Again, I didn't plan on doing that. But place it so informs my psyche that I can't escape it at this point, even if I wanted to, right? So, and it's interesting because I was trying to write some poems about, you know, the city. New York City is a great, you know, everything's there, and I just couldn't do it. And recently, though, I've got a couple poems that sort of have these allusions to or images, but it's taken 10 years for those images to kind of rise up to the surface. And now they're in conversation with, you know, a one-lane gravel road or something. So, yeah. So thanks. Yeah, good question. Hey.
What's the writing process that's kind of like produced the best poetry for you?
I should say I dislike almost everything I write. So, because I'm always, you know, you write something that you do like, and that's also scary because then you have to do it again and again, and you know, and you wonder, is this going to happen, right? But I think the key for me is just it's work. It's not, you know, sit down every day. I carry a notebook with me. I have, you know, a pen with me at all times. I write on my palm a lot if I'm not near paper. And trying to carve out time every day to write is important. I think I've gotten it in graduate school. It's really easy because that's all I had to do, right? And so I lived with my roommate who's also in the program with me, but he was a novelist. And when you're writing a novel, which is terrifying to me, write to the end of the line and then do that for 400 pages, you've got sort of a set idea of where it's going, right? Then if you write 300 pages and it's bad, you got to fix it. I write a bad poem, and just, okay, on to the next one. But he was so diligent and would go and say, I'm going to write for 6 hours today. And he would do it. And because I was his roommate and he was my friend, I would go sit with him. And eventually I worked up this routine where I was writing, and writing's often reading as well, right? Or just being with language, I think, is important. And so I developed a really good routine. Now it's more like if I get an hour a day, that's pretty good. Over the last few years, with sort of the rise of Zoom, I've been with some friends every Sunday for 2 hours. We sit together and we write, and that's been actually really nice. And we do this thing which you all can do, and you should do if you're writing, where you get together with some friends and you say, okay, everyone bring 3 words. And, you know, so everyone's got 3 words and maybe a phrase or an image or a color or whatever it is. And you say, okay, we're going to write for an hour and try and use as much of this as we can. And it's actually really been incredible. So, yeah. It's work, though.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool. Maybe one more, or right at 5. It's, you know, dinner time. So, well, thanks so much, everybody, for having me, and yeah, stay in touch. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. If you want to stick around and hang out for a little while and enjoy the cheeses, and maybe ask a question that you were afraid to ask of Matthew here, so feel free to stick around for a little while.
I'm going to stick around and enjoy the cheeses, so yeah.